Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. First of all, I would like to thank Marie-Alice Scherer, the Secretary of Media Lab, and Fabienne Roos, our PhD, for their help in organizing this special event. I've been following the work of Moa Krutrök and Andreas Schellewald for a couple of years now, and I greatly appreciate their research. They both study TikTok and its multiple modes of appropriation, but from quite different perspectives. Andreas focuses on our relationship with the For You page and the social connections people develop on the platform. Moa studies media content and emerging modes of social and identity expression, including how we express grief, trauma, and resilience in digital spaces. What strikes me in both of their studies is how they reveal TikTok's playful dimension. The platform doesn't promote mental health, political diversity, or ethical practices. Yet, we must also acknowledge the meaningful and creative ways people use it. Another notion that emerges in your work, both of you, is relatability. Can you relate to this video, and why? Would you share it to a friend, and to whom? In other words, do you share a common social imaginary? What does your TikTok For You page say about you and about your social belongings? Sébastien Salerno, my colleague, and I thought it would be great for Media Lab to hear from you both and have the chance to discuss your work. So, Moa, I'll hand you the microphone. You will speak first, and then we will listen to Andreas, and then finally we will open the discussion to the public. Thank you. Alors, on va enregistrer mon speech. Et tu es, du coup, ici. Does it work? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put it up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Let's see. First, I'll just find my notes over here. Where are the screens? Do you guys know? Here, maybe. Screen so that I could have one screen here and one screen here, so I can see my notes. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Do you think? Does it say that somewhere?
Monitor.
Monitor, yeah.
You have to change that option, yeah.
And NEPA, maybe? Oh, yeah. Chargé.
Voilà.
To that one. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I'll place it there. Thank you so much. Perfect. Up here. Oh. This? Maybe. Is that enough? Oh, it worked.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. Cool. All right. After some technical difficulties dealing with these digital spaces and the Media Lab, right? So good to be here, and how fascinating that so many people, not just students, I'm guessing, maybe also faculty, is in this hall now that it's approaching 6:30. I can't get my students to do anything that's not on their actual curriculum that they get graded for. So I'm very fascinated by having you guys here at these late hours as well. So I'll be talking to you guys today about wars, memes, and playfulness. So during the war in Ukraine, the media images from this war has primarily looked like this in the traditional media, as we all have seen it. But online, the war has been looking quite different, often with memes and humor as its forefront. That is something sort of like this. So my name is Eriksson Krutrök. I'm an associate professor in sociology at Umeå University, Sweden. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about the role of memes, humor, and digital culture, and what that can teach us about our times, maybe especially during these trying times of our societies. So I've been researching different forms of societal crises now for quite some time. And for me, it actually all began somewhere completely different. It started here, 2011, with a terrible, terrible terrorist attack that happened in Norway, in Umeå. You might have recognized this somehow. And it sort of shaped my way of reflecting about these collective forms and understandings of terrorist attacks and societal crises. And the need, actually, to use social media as a way of connecting with others through a crisis. And what I specifically looked at that time was Twitter, the old Twitter, if you can even remember it at these points in time, and how people were spreading information about this event, how commemoration looked, specifically from a national and international perspective. Focusing often on the types of questions of how could this even happen? What led up to this point? But as our digital spaces have changed, you know, Twitter is gone, we have something called X. It's not really the same, is it? So has my research also changed. And in this changing media climate, with their own possibilities for information spread during crises, the role is not just placed on the platforms themselves, but also these content creation practices and the algorithmic systems that also put them to the forefront, not least in times of war. And while new technologies do allow for these new forms of war witnessing, it also reflects back to other times of new types of media and how that changed societal conceptions of wars. So in the last century, these televised visualities of war were becoming more and more prominent, to the point where Susan Sontag, who's a social critic, also an author, she stated that wars are now living room sights and sounds. And in this 21st century then, mediatized images of wars have become these ephemeral pieces of our everyday. Scrolling experiences of ongoing wars can make these distant horrors of conflict even more immediate and present in our everyday lives. So as war-related content has been gaining widespread attention here on TikTok primarily, certain content creators as well have propelled to these unprecedented heights of celebrity. And as a result, a new type of content creator has then emerged, what we call the war influencer. So at the start here, we saw a video. An Italian tarantella was being played with this clicking sound and moving, which then led to a basis of a meme. So this is an old song who's not specifically tied to TikTok whatsoever. And memes in themselves are these digital expressions that spread and change and gain meaning through these sharing practices. And the word memes, yes, comes from the biologist Richard Dawkins, who compared then biological genes to memes, a product of society that changes over time and is shaped by our societal interactions. Something that biologists might call a meme, but in sociology. We know that, for example, Berger and Luckman and others have said exactly the same, but far much better. But rather, we can think of memes as a form of internet dialect in this sense. They function as these small sort of building blocks of images, text, but also sounds. And specifically during crises, playing with memes can serve as a political act, as creators weave then trauma, adversity, and criticism into these novel formats online, offering a shared space for playful coping amidst crises, for example, through the COVID-19 pandemic or refugee crises, and other types of formats. And over time, the very format of memes, they have evolved from these textual and visual elements to a much more multimodal nature, which we just saw, thanks to primarily functions such as TikTok's audio feature. It's just a click of a button to participate in these playful and humorous, in a sense, also collective forms of meme culture. And that's also why Aberdeen and others have called it an oral turn of memes, whereby numerous users repurpose these short musical excerpts or remixes or diverse forms of sounds, and those evolve over time across the platform and are remixed in different ways. So as sounds are reused by users across TikTok, content becomes interlinked with others through the employment of the same sounds, which has effectively established these audio then memes as TikTok's primary, or some say TikTok's fundamental organizing structure. And the platform is kind of important here, actually. And José van Dijk has talked about platforms as, in a dual sense, different levels of platforms. So social media platforms, they consist of a number of primarily technical components, including data, metadata, algorithms, protocols, what have you, all of these technical components, but also an interaction between how these elements are being used in a social sense. So this social technical level of platforms is something that is evolving over time, and it also allows for example, sounds to become a primary organizing structure, where, according to Daniel Klug, TikTok has now become an audiovisual playground. And me and my co-author, Tom Diven, we have studied content creators that are shaping then war communication through these socio-technical conditions of TikTok and becoming international and very important storytellers during wars. And the role of playfulness is really important here. In responses to hardship and ongoing wars, the access of the body and the embodiment of playfulness can become then a central component in how memes become both adjacent to these crises, but also interpreted and played with through these connective patterns. So Vittorio Marone, who's a humor scholar actually, he said that online humor can function as a cushioning glue for social cohesion in times of societal upheaval. And these technological conditions then, and the affordances placed within these platforms and the collectives then of certain platforms, these can also shape the mutual understandings of humor, what becomes humorful, what is allowed to play with, for example, during times of crisis, and can create this social cohesion. And in fact, humor can also fill this function. If we just escape from these technological senses and the internet types of platforms, from a sociological perspective, humor can in fact become a sociological function during times of crises. So during the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, Antonín Orblik, who's a sociologist from the old days, 1942, he wrote that, "I may go so far as to say that gallows humor is an unmistakable measure of the good morals and spirit of resistance of the oppressed peoples." So we actually have found that humor and playfulness is an important sociological part of crisis if we look at the social cohesion aspects of it. So in this way then, which might seem contradictory to crises and wars, a cute sound from an interview with a very small boy, you might have seen this clip before, became viral when it was new. He's enjoying a piece of corn. He's talking about how much he loves the corn, especially with butter on it. Couldn't agree more. Can be remixed then into a song about how much he loves this corn. We'll look at a short clip here.
Me, I really like corn.
What do you like about corn?
It's corn.
It's corn! Of course it's corn. This, in turn, can be used as a basis for understanding new types of content creation during other very pressing needs or contexts of sharing love for something completely different, which is maybe not corn during a time of war, maybe your homeland during adhesive places. So let's look at that.
For me, I really like corn.
What do you like about corn?
It's corn. A big little bit nuts. It has the juice.
Quite different connotations then. So we began this ethnographic process of finding, following, and exploring both users and their content, including sounds, during a full year, me and Tom, which was part of then our fieldwork and our subsequent data collection. So we collected a series of videos, 97 videos to be exact, which were then manually coded and analyzed further. And our work on war influencers, it connects to the practices and tendencies of war influencers then, with historical and contextual developments of the histories of mediations of war, via then war photography, but also internet research into citizen journalism and specifically influencer culture. So we'll look into these three aspects now. Beginning with war photography, or the visual, perhaps, mediation or documentation of wars, has traditionally then captured conflicts through more traditional methods of the legacy media. And these visual testimonies, they have traditionally reached massive audiences due to these media outlet affiliations. And with this wide reach, these images have always then captured a moment, a specific moment in time, that has also shaped public opinion about ongoing conflicts in specific ways. As, for example, Barbie Zelizer has shown in her research on Second World War and those types of imagery. This image was taken by the Swedish press photographer Paul Hansen, and it won one of the prizes during the World Press Photo competition, which actually shows Gaza. But with the enhancements then of social media and mobile technologies, this has given rise to citizen journalism, a new form of war documentation, who allows then these citizen journalists to be a part of how wars are mediated during ongoing conflicts, and are understood then as these individuals who document events onto their own profiles and these private accounts or these blogs. And in this way, their followers or other social media users as a whole can partake in these unfolding events through what at least Mette Mortensen has called a connective witnessing. We're connected in our witnessing of wars, where we witness ongoing events in real time and actually in ever faster ways as well. Johanna Suomiala and her colleagues, they have further proposed that the multi-platform content circulation across platforms in a wider sense, not just on one specific platform or app, but how it spreads and being shared across them, also shape the understood liveness of these events, how they're live and we're active in participating within them as witnesses of specifically the wars. Now, influencers, on the other hand, they have emerged as these so to say, key players in our today's contemporary digital society, primarily through the adoption then of these attention-getting techniques, as pronounced by Alice Morwick, to engage vast audiences. And they create content, of course, in order to get this attention. They have these techniques to do it, and build then social capital. But several researchers have pointed to these maybe non-commercial aspects of this influence, and how it can be used for political causes and actions, and sometimes even politainment, meaning politics and entertainment being intertwined within their content creation, which has been said to mark a new phase in political communication as a whole, that embraces, so to say, the spectacle of specific events. But first, we need to be clear about the typology. If we're talking about war influencers, what are we actually saying here? So we have understood them as two different specific types. The celebrity war influencer type is actually one that transitions from the celebrity active, being a content creator within a space that is well known, for example, that have then transitioned this existing digital presence into wartime advocacy, then benefiting from an already established offline fame and attracting in a pre-existing audiences to this specific cause. While then the user war influencer, they have relied here on exclusively on algorithmic support to amplify their wartime narratives. And focusing here on the second in this study that we've been partaking in, we identify various platform vernaculars then employed by these user war influencers to share content and increase their popularity, their visibility, such as creating mimetic content, as we just saw, and utilizing then the platform's specific features for interactive sessions, including Q&A sessions, live sessions, for example. So beginning first, we see that they utilize specifically something that we talked about in the classroom today, those of you who were there, the POV perspectives, the point of view type of content that focuses specifically on this first-person documentation of their own experiences. And a POV aesthetic is actually deeply rooted in a very non-technical sense or an offline sense in classical cinema, allowing viewers often to experience a scene then, specifically in film, from a particular character's perspective, right? POV. So by adopting this aesthetic into TikTok, TikTok users can shape these mediations of war to these everyday realities from their own perspectives, connecting then with audiences and fostering empathy and relatability with audiences in these real life scenarios in very sometimes close ways. And in this way, the POV becomes a means to forge connections during times of crises, aligning then closely with these practices of the citizen journalist, right, who are viewing this specific unfolding events as a form of spreading content during a crisis. Second, we found that they use these popular mimetic practices to express their own ongoing hardships. But also, this allowed them to become more than visible through their content creation by adopting often popular memes. You might have heard this Italian tarantella in other sites of TikTok, I'm sure, because it became a very popular sound at that time. And especially maybe the corn kid sound, I'm sure you've heard across the platform as well. So they do adopt these popular sounds for a reason. And we found that users utilizing these popular audio memes on the platforms, they had roughly 80 times more likes than these non-meme-based content within the same types of data. So videos that became visible often had these trending content characteristics. But it also creates frameworks for the gravity for their warfare realities, as then juxtaposed almost by this light-hearted music or dance routines or what have you, amplifying their wartime experience and reaching then a wider audience. Some users also used entertainment strategies such as an emotional appeal or humor or cynicism in this ongoing political discourse, and especially for war, almost as a reporting on specific events. And here we found that TikTokers used this form of politainment, politics and entertainment intertwined as a force for political dissent, making almost sometimes breaking news coverage of war-related topics within their regions in playful and humorous ways, engaging with their audience. Often using a green screen of the topic at hand, imagery from news media, and even presenting their content as these news shows with updates, daily updates. However, this juxtaposition of the news updates with bombings, for example, was then put in a specific type of consecration with smiling, imitating key figures via performances. For example, Putin was being interpreted in different ways or performed in different ways, became these playful interactions with their audiences, also shaping how we're witnessing this war. So those in power outside of the platforms, right, have also understood here the role of social platforms in the potential of war communication, which is why they have been actively used, both actually by Russian and Americans within this war, that we know of at least. And this means that even something as frivolous maybe as influencers can sound to most or some, and memes, they can become these political pawns almost in a larger geopolitical game. And here one may need to reflect on how states also use these same forms of humorous communication patterns in their own social media channels, and how they then use memes as a way of spreading perhaps propaganda.
I want to sit back and relax and enjoy my evening, when all of a sudden I hear this agitating, grating voice.
Yeah, grating voice. So the types of content creation can shape amplification motives in these ways. And especially Crystal Aberdeen has highlighted that algorithmic amplification is central to the way influencers reach an audience. And this is done here through the use of memes, often attention-grabbing themes and a lot of emotion within the clips. And amplification matters, not least in times of crises. What information is being seen and heard the most also matters for the effect on public opinion. So not least of all, in matters of wars where two sides are trying to get their positions within a geopolitical international conflict, this matters specifically. And it doesn't just matter on the platform, it actually matters outside of the platform as well. Some of these users, we saw her dancing to the Italian tarantella just now, Valeria Shashnuk. She's been in the European Parliament, for example, speaking and talking to Ursula von der Leyen, which is pictured here. She also got a book deal. She's in a documentary about herself. It does have these amplification matters with outside of the platforms as well, in real-life societies. But it's also interesting to just reflect, actually, on what influencer practices mean for everyday societies. This book just came out by Sophie Bishop using her own terminology of the influencer creep. And it might sound like a creep, right? Someone that's creepy. That's not actually what she means. She means that the influencer style of making content actually creeps or seeps into other sides of society. So for example, we have pictures here of Mamdani, his ongoing campaign in New York mayoral election. He making a specific video using a meme that we all kind of know now. I don't need to sing it to you, you know the song, yeah. With Ilana, who's a famous actor. And how these techniques also are being used within other contexts. So I've also added a film from TikTok that shows two journalists from specific media houses in Sweden shaking hands as if maybe we can be okay with each other anyways, even though we have these different sides of the journalistic practices of Sweden. So it creeps into other spaces that we may not have been used to before. And this digital presence become nurtured by the ways or these types of content creation and through these attention-grabbing techniques. And here you can say that memes do play a big role in how we're using specific places as a way of creeping into specific parts of platforms and how digital culture then shapes how this is made. Now, there is a need to research platform communication, not least, I think, at least, in regards to what, oh, sorry. It had sound, sorry. We're not gonna look at it again, we've already seen it. And the role of humor here is important for the ways that it shapes these content dynamics and how this then plays out as an amplifier via these algorithmic recommendation systems of platforms. And this can matter then for war communication as a whole in contemporary geopolitical conflicts. So platforms, they matter too, as I've said repeatedly here, and actually there are these ongoing investigations also into their actual uses of platforms and how they respond to these types of crises. Are they spreading disinformation or not? Are they spreading content that's harmful to minors, etc.? Through then this new EU law that I'm sure you're aware of, DSA, which is intended then to create more transparency into the platforms themselves. It's not just about the content being shaped there or shared there, but also how those are spreading specific content. And I'm part right now of an expert group that are investigating whether this actually works in practice, because we still do not know, especially when it comes actually to researcher access to this type of data. And just last week, the Commission's preliminary findings show that Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok may have put in burdensome procedures and tools for researchers in their research requested access to the public data, which leaves them then with these partial understandings of what actually goes on within the platform spaces that are being used in this sense. So we really do need to explore them further, and that is ongoing, but my hopes are up. So we'll see where it lands. So we've been working on several texts within this space now. I know some of you students have read at least some of it. We also have a book deal now for a book on war influencers. So that will also come in 2027 that me and Tom look forward to a lot. But outside of that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now the floor is yours. And I take back my computer. You have everything here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, hello everyone, also from my side, and also thanks again for the invitation and having me. So yeah, my name is Andreas, and I'm today presenting research that is based on my PhD research I did at Goldsmiths University London, as well as follow-up research I did during a year as a graduate school fellow at Goldsmiths as well, and I'm now also working on turning into a book similar to Moore and Tom. But yeah, so basically the topic of my talk today is called Thinking About You, and taking the you here figuratively as this kind of figure of you, the user, but also you as kind of another person you can interact with on social media, and what kind of has happened to this you in these ways in which platforms have become increasingly focused on personalization and media consumption. So I'm going to start with a bit of context, then jump to some of my more empirical findings, and then end with a discussion where I'm probably looking more at the theoretical side of things and how we can maybe rethink how we define and study social media then also. So one kind of motivation or impulse for this work has been this supposed slow decline of social media. So I've been working on this kind of for the last 5 years, and there's been kind of a recurring theme, both in like the larger public debate, but also in academic discourses, that there's a shift happening where social media are becoming less social, primarily focusing here, especially on platforms like TikTok, that are kind of seen as having kind of giving start to this decline of social qualities and opportunities in the media landscape. And if we kind of take TikTok as a case here, we can see that there's kind of two arguments being made, or two features of the platform that's kind of linked to this decline or the end of social media. And the first is kind of content centricity, which is not something that TikTok invented as a design principle, but really kind of intensified. So it was kind of quite new back in 2020 when TikTok kind of had this big boom, that there was an app where you basically click on the app icon, it opens up, and the screen is immediately filled with a video that immediately starts playing. Like there's no choice whether you not want to watch it, it's just the choice is being made, you are here to consume content. And of centralizing engagement with content as the primary principle of platform engagement, and rendering everything else, such as engagement with comments, communities, side features of that platform design. And then in connection with that, TikTok also obviously emphasized this algorithm-centered design, meaning on TikTok, when you engage with content, you're also indirectly engaging with an algorithmic system, which again puts focus on your engagement with content, your engagement with the algorithm, and your engagement with other people as something secondary or tertiary in this new design logic. And obviously then, when we look at these debates, but also maybe now with the new developments of like ChatGPT, AI, and the development of communicative machine systems, there's obviously the question now if there's a replacement of human-to-human social interaction with human-machine socialities emerging. And I've contributed to that kind of discourse myself already, and I could probably talk about that itself for 30 minutes here. And I think it's obviously, you might come across it as well, there's increasing discourse also where people feel that even algorithms like TikTok are entities that kind of are speaking to them, that they're having a real dialogue or relationship with them on this platform and having kind of this real sociable experience there. But what I'm trying to focus on today is more kind of going back a bit and trying to understand TikTok through literature of scholarship from various fields that has tried to define the social and social media, not so much by analyzing the features of platforms, but rather by looking at the practices through which they are used in social settings. So I'm drawing here kind of literature that, for example, in the early days of social media platforms, but also mobile media technologies such as cell phone, has looked how these technologies can enrich existing social relationships, help, for example, with the micro-coordination of meeting friends, or how they function as catalysts for group interaction, just being kind of a new addition to the repertoire of tools that people use to conduct their social life. But I'm also interested here in the ways in which these social media have been understood as ways that allow us to sense the presence of distant others in new ways, to gain this kind of contextual awareness for what's going on in our social circles and kind of social life more broadly. And specifically, I'm trying to contribute here also to the kind of newest addition to that body of literature, which looks at algorithms and algorithmic recommended content as this kind of sociocultural currency, again, a kind of research through which people affirm a status in a social group or express relationships in these new ways, making social media social in that sense. So really quickly maybe about kind of the context, again, from which I'm speaking here. So basically a unified view of 3 projects that I've been working on. 2 of those which are more like digital fieldwork projects, meaning I spend time on the apps, in this case TikTok and Instagram, as examples of personalized social media platforms scrolling through the apps, understanding what type of content is kind of popular, how people engage with the features there. But then also I spent 1 year working with a group of 30 UK-based young adults to understand how they actually use the app, specifically TikTok in this case, as part of their everyday social life. Okay, now I'm gonna jump into some more concrete findings of my research here. So one of the main things I try to understand is, what is the role of TikTok in everyday life? And what you see here on the left side is kind of a summary view of all the different situations and users that I encountered during my fieldwork. And most of them, or basically all of them, are really centered around this idea of using TikTok for yourself and by yourself. For my participants, TikTok was always about having a moment of me time, using it when I want to relax, when I need to kind of take a step back from my everyday routines. What you see here in red are kind of the more positive use cases, like taking a breather, using it kind of to spend some time you have to waiting on something. Whereas the blue ones are the more, let's say, negative side, where you are kind of distracted from something, or where you kind of come across content that's kind of unsettling for you, or you can't stop scrolling while you're kind of trying to fall asleep at night. And again, that's also another topic where I could kind of talk a lot about, but what really got me interested early in my project is that when I was listening to these stories of how people scroll through the app, it was always about myself, about personal use, but then at the end there always was a mention of oh yeah, by the way, I'm also sharing so many videos with my friends all the time. So it kind of emerged in this process that always there was an element of social interaction coming out of this personalized media consumption. That you can see, for example, here in the quote from one of my participants who mentioned that, usually at the end of a session of scrolling through TikTok, she will send videos that are kind of really relatable, touching on certain elements of people, or their friends' identities, and kind of bringing that kind of content she came across in her experience on TikTok into other people's content feed as well. So that's kind of what got me really interested in understanding, okay, what are the kind of overarching and recurring dynamics of content sharing in relation to TikTok use here. And that's kind of these three big dynamics that I kind of identified through my research. So one is kind of the direct personal to public sharing dynamic. Another one is the indirect personal to social, and the direct personal to interpersonal. It's the last one, probably also the most common one. And I'm going to spend a bit of time now to go through all of them in a bit more detail. So the direct personal to public relates, for example, to cases what more has been talked about, where there is a video that, for example, goes viral on a platform and then gets picked up and shared into other platforms like X or Twitter back then, or even on other media formats like shown on the news, and becomes, again, a kind of social kind of catalyst in that way. And one of the examples in which I kind of encountered that in my fieldwork was Hannes, who was a young journalist living in London at the time. And he was nobody who really enjoyed actually TikTok. He was just there mostly for the hype and trend of it. I think he never used TikTok for more than 10 minutes at a time. He was mostly just going on there, scrolling maybe for 5 minutes and stopping again. But surprisingly, despite this very infrequent use and not of that, he found something meaningful in his kind of relation to his job as a journalist and coming across videos, especially from youth culture, political movement, where he felt, this is very interesting, my readers need to see this. So he basically took a video from his personal social feed and shared it on X with his kind of readers as a journalist, creating these dynamics, then also where this video could be reshared, recirculated, and again, give rise to very rich social interaction across platform on this dimension of interoperability. The second dynamic I came across is this indirect personal to social route, which again, it has a similar starting point in the sense that it's about videos that go viral, that attain a certain visibility and popularity on the platform, but in this case specifically also on other platforms, which then gives, again, as mentioned, rise to these cycles of circulation where videos are passed around and in some way makes their way back into these more intimate social spheres, which I kind of illustrate here through the stories that Mona, one of my participants, explained to me. So Mona was basically one of the international people I met in London. She was originally from Argentina, but had lived in London for a decade by the time I met her. And she was first a student and then later worked in the advertising industry. And obviously for her, social media and internet specifically were like meaningful in the more traditional sense of saying, I want to stay in touch with what's going on in Argentina, I want to read the news, I want to be in touch with my family, I want to chat with them, I just want to also know what's trending and that kind of stuff. But what really got me interested was this story here where she talked about her mother sending her and her younger sibling what she called funny video she saw just to stay in touch and just to initiate a contact and being kind of in the setting, which for them was the moment where they said, hey, it's a funny video, but actually it's a TikTok we saw 3 weeks ago. So showing again here kind of the way in which these content pieces are kind of these artifacts that kind of around which social relationships are organized and articulated, but also giving rise here, I think, to new dynamics and challenges for social inclusion and exclusion, where there is a certain literacy required for people to understand what is content that I can share, what is content that is actually allowing me to meaningfully connect with my kids, or the other way around, what is content that I can share as a child with my parents to stay in touch with them at a distance. So rethinking here the dynamics in which the social is articulated through these newer types of content in that way. And the last one I've outlined here is the direct personal to interpersonal sharing dynamic. So this is probably the one that most people experience most frequently in their daily life as well. So it's really based around, again, what I showed before in the quote, the experience of scrolling on your personal For You page and coming across videos that stand out or that remind you of someone else, that make you think about someone that you already know, be that your sibling, your partner, someone from your friend group. And then basically taking these videos and relocating them in a different setting, such as a chat group, or even walking up to someone and showing them the phone and watching the video together in this kind of setting of physical co-presence. And one typical example, which kind of illustrated for me this kind of new social dynamic here, was Antonio, who was a recent university graduate at the time and had started a kind of a job in a big corporate office in London, which isn't the, let's say, most fulfilling activity to do during your 9 to 5 hours. So usually what for him made TikTok appealing primarily, again, was his case to say, I come home after a long day in the office, I don't feel really fulfilled with my life, but I also don't have much time or energy left to do something kind of more meaningful. So I just go on TikTok for 30 minutes to kind of manage my mood, uplift my spirit at least a little bit to keep going. But then kind of what emerged again, this indirect consequence for him was being able to come across videos where he was actually thinking, oh yeah, that's so much my friend, I need to share this with them, sparking these kind of ephemeral connections and kind of feeling this kind of sense of connection to other people. And over the course of my research, I found that there's, actually a lot of thought being put into how my participants shared these videos. It wasn't just randomly picking any content you find and just saying, oh yeah, that's a funny video, that's a trending video, I need to share it. There was actually a lot of thought being put in to say, this is actually relating to that part of your identity. This is re-identifying that element from last summer where we had this shared experience, or that's kind of something we talked about last week, or participants saying, I'm sharing something that my siblings and I can relate to because it brings back our memory. So showing here really a very rich dynamic of people curating and appropriating these affordances of personalization to find content through which they can articulate these relationships in an environment that's not designed to do that in a more direct way. And then what I did kind of in following up from my PhD research was basically spend 14 months on Instagram, specifically Instagram Reels, where I tried to immerse myself in kind of these types of content, and specifically a genre of content that's still fairly new in the sense of being new in short video platforms that is kind of purposefully designed to be shared. So it's kind of videos like you can see it outlined here, which can be breathtaking landscape, and then it has a kind of line of text written over it saying, the person in your share list owes you a holiday in the mountains. So it's kind of video that by itself has no really information value, it doesn't have really any entertainment value, there's nothing that you get out of it if you just consume it by yourself. It only has kind of value and meaning if you act on it as kind of an opportunity to share content. And for me that's quite interesting, drawing here also on the notion of platform vernaculars, how it shows how actually people are now reappropriating these spaces that are designed for personalized consumption, but turning them into something where actually through the content they create and how they act on it, it becomes much more social in that sense. And this is a project that I collected the data and analyzed them together with my friend Yi-Ting Wang from University of Hawaii, And one thing we found really interesting here is that if we look, for example, at the language that is being used, there is increasingly reference to features such as the share list and other kind of notions of the algorithmic, meaning ways in which relationships are sorted, measured, classified through platform logics, which I think also shows for us here a really interesting dynamic of power, how these platforms come now to redefine what is considered a good friend, what is considered your best friend, based on how frequently you engage with them, reintroducing also then through that dynamic a way in which social relationships are programmed by platform powers and logics. But also another thing we found really interesting here is linking to the idea of playfulness, how people were actually developing quite interesting, intimate ways of staying in touch with these type of contents. One video we came across here, which was found really interesting, is part of a genre that's of videos that are designed to be annoying. It's kind of a way of playful tease. Basically, the videos say, keep sending this to your friends until they block you. Or one video was saying, send it to a friend so they have opened their phone and see a picture of a piece of garlic bread. So it's like there's, obviously, it's completely absurd in by itself. But what I found interesting, how they start playing on this idea, okay, you send a video and then someone else's phone vibrates because of notification, they have to pick it out, so you kind of evoke and embodied physical reaction on them by sharing this video and creating again a new, really intimate dynamic of social connection here in these personalized media environments. And now what I'm kind of working on right now, which is a bit more on the theoretical side of things, is trying to understand, okay, how can we take these insights and transform them into a kind of a, not so much new theory, but new perspective on understanding what is the social in social media. So basically, as a quick recap, I think these are kind of the 5 things that we've seen so far through kind of on the previous slides. I think the number 1 is kind of that the personal is social insofar that our identities do not exist in isolation. So even though people go on a platform like TikTok are on a For You page, who that you is always also tied to the people they have experiences with in the past, people with whom they share hobbies, people with whom they spend a lot of time. So I think the idea, obviously, maybe very obviously as a truism here, that personalization means isolation is, I think, false in that sense that our identities are always tied to certain social contexts in which we exist and thrive. I think we've also seen then in that regard that content centricity and short-form content can be very potent cultural resources to enact these relationships, that they are not kind of constraining in the sense of being just meaningless entertainment, but rather there is something meaningful to them when they are used in specific ways, such as articulating relationships. We've also seen that algorithms are kind of catalysts that are quite powerful in orchestrating these social interaction and relations, that if you have a friend whose identities might be censored in kind of the dominant paradigm of algorithmic amplification, you will be shown less videos that you can share with that friend, which might give rise to new dynamics of exclusion and inclusion, again, giving kind of this programming power to platforms in determining how we can articulate relationships as we are kind of dependent on these systems, giving us these opportunities. And then also what I find really interesting here is that kind of what we see, there's a lot of new things emerging, but despite that, there's a lot of old dynamics of social interactions that remain kind of in high importance, and specifically the dimension of personal talk and influence, which I'm kind of referenced here broadly to, back obviously communications fields, 1950s, Katz's work on personal influence in the mass media context, arguing that the consequences of mass media are not so much a direct effect on people, but rather mediated for how mass media contents are kind of discussed in kind of social circles. I think we see something similar here, again, in relation to the influence of algorithms and the consequences of these platform contents by, again, having a dimension of personal talk influence as a mediator behind that. And what I'm trying to theorize now is to say that maybe it's this idea of interpersonal relationship dynamics. We see that here's more form of sociability rather than sociality at work, and potentially a new kind of the Greek symposium. So drawing here again on a more intellectual concept, the Greek symposium being this kind of highly performative, regulated gathering, primarily of elites in the Greek city-state, which was done for no specific purpose of saying we want to meet and then discuss something, but are just coming together to be together and sustain a certain idea of social order and saying, okay, we are all equals at this table and just can be together and sustain our kind of status as equals in that regard. And I think we can see that kind of by looking at 3 dimensions on this more, let's say, abstract theoretical level in that sense. So I argue that when we're speaking about sociability here, we see a form of that sociability which is atmospheric, ephemeral, and algorithmically orchestrated. So kind of the argument here is to say that personalized social media provide people with cues in the form of content and opportunities such as features for sharing content which allow for social interaction to arise, but doing that in a very atmospheric, ephemeral manner, meaning it's not a fixed infrastructure that people can rely on, but rather they have to dynamically enact that kind of experience when they see an opportunity arise on their content feed. And as mentioned before, I argue that this atmospheric quality is a direct consequence of short video content being so easily convertible as a cultural resource, that it doesn't dominate an interaction, that it can be a medium in kind of the strict sense that it is not a thing by itself, but it's rather something that allows a connection to be established. And I'm also specifically interested here again in kind of these atmospheric qualities through the mobility of TikTok as a medium, where it allows obviously for you to send a video anywhere, anytime, but also allows you to just walk into your sibling's room and say, hey, let's watch some TikToks together. So I think it's really flexible also in that ability to give kind of an emergence to these atmospheric, ephemeral, sociable experiences. And as I mentioned before, there's implications here for media literacy, algorithm literacy, and how that becomes a really critical ability for people to actually be meaningfully engaged through these platform environments today. The second dimension I'm outlining here is related to like intimacies of interpersonal relationships, and I argue that we primarily see here a form of playful social interaction, which I described and also in the paper that some of you read as kind of phatic communication or as primarily communication with an aesthetic function. So what I mean is kind of what matters in these communicative acts is not so much, again, information being shared, but rather that just the fact that you are communicating, that you are in the similar form of small talk, speaking for the purpose of speaking, because when you're speaking with the other, you are together and you can kind of experience the other as kind of someone that is in your presence, that is a human like you, that you have this kind of social experience with. And what I saw also in my research on Instagram, for example, that these contents designed for being shared show a very broad variety of scripts and opportunities to share, which is not just being annoying or just kind of expressing kind of certain words of forms of algorithmic words, but also giving ways to show your affection, longing, appreciation, tease, a wide range of affective and emotional messages you want to kind of portray and use those to, again, charge relationships in that way. And for me here is kind of the question of meaning then becomes really one of the social orderness of these reactions, drawing here on Simmel's work as well on sociability. Meaning there are, I would argue, certain rules implicit in how people share content that define what makes a meaningful interaction, that you can share a video that is perfectly annoying with your friends, but you couldn't share it with your boss. So it defines in certain ways, again, social order and brings that social order back into these environments through these rules that are emerging about what is kind of appropriate to be shared with other people, creating, again, these kind of very playful forms of sociality emerging here. And then the last dimension I'm outlining here is more on the idea of the self-identity, which obviously plays a very big role in kind of the domain of personalized social media. And I argue that when we look at these kind of short video contents here and their sharing interactions, that we see kind of them being a form of paratext. So paratext being a text that is about another text. And I'm basically drawing here on a very common understanding in sociology as yourself or your identity being kind of this biographic narrative, which outlined by scholars such as Anthony Giddens, meaning that people in modern societies have a certain idea of who they are today, who they want to be in the future, and they continuously reflect on this idea as they look for new jobs, as they engage with relationships, as they buy goods, and ask themselves, is this aligning with my identity? Is this kind of an expression of who I want to be in the future, and that kind of stuff. Now, if we look at this from this angle, we can see that short video contents, especially when they are shared, create like two of these paratexts that help people in this process of biographic self-reflection. And the one is the kind of affective paratext, which I talked about before a bit already, meaning that these videos provide a way for people to establishes continuous presence in the life of distant others, and as well as having other people's lives being kind of present around them, meaning you can receive videos from your siblings that are reminding you of certain shared memories you had in your childhood. It can be videos from your friends that kind of touch on certain shared interests, again, kind of making it very effectively present that you have this connection with other people as you engage with these personalized media environments. And the other one is the symbolic paratext, which is kind of, again, more focusing on what I mentioned now as the kind of more literal ways of thinking about who you are, who is your identity, and tying that together on the symbolic dimension, bridging both presence and kind of the symbolic dimension in that regard. And now what I'm kind of trying to do in this larger project is kind of theorizing these interactions as a symposic ritual, which is a bit of a very technical intellectual term in that regard, arguing that kind of we see here new forms of sociability emerging that are performative, playful, but still regulated in their intimacy, and are new ways in which kind of social bonds and ways of social ordering are maintained in these new media landscapes that we live in, and contrasting them to other forms of the symposium that were more focused on physical co-presence in the past. And the reason why I'm kind of trying to do all of that is to say that if we have debates that kind of focus on the decline of social features and argue that that's what we kind of should be concerned about, we kind of start to miss kind of the richness in social practices still going on that are kind of reshaping and giving rise to a lot of questions that we kind of still need to answer and think about in that regard to understand kind of the real consequence of an app like TikTok on interpersonal relationship dynamics. And I think one consequence is that we see here more traditional social domains such as friend groups or kinship networks becoming really important again in these environments as the relational infrastructure through which personalized media environments can be kind of very emotionally significant to people. But I think also what we see here again is the role of content sharing as a social catalyst for giving rise to intergroup dynamics, as well as being a form of capital through which relationship and social status can be established. But I think also from a critical angle, what we see here then is maybe a bit concerning, the increasing commodification of the quote-unquote stuff through which kind of our emotional life is being expressed and articulated. And I'm drawing here, or trying to draw specifically in my future work, a parallel to the dynamics that we've been seen in other decades and eras, and also sectors such as the greeting card industry in the United States, where there's a lot of research showing how companies like Hallmark have monopolized this entire industry and now have very kind of high degrees of control of shaping how people can express, their birthday wishes, how they celebrate certain festive moments such as Christmas, Halloween, and so on, by controlling kind of the supply of kind of the stuff through which we express these feelings and emotions we share with other people. But yeah, that's it.